Is this game bad? Maybe. Is it difficult? Definitely. And I know that there are people out there who have played it so many times that they can run through it with no problem. Just like how I can run through Donkey Kong Country on the Super Nintendo, because I've played it to death. I know where and how to handle the difficult parts of the game. For the average player, or kids, who were the target audience for this game, this is a rough one. But does that make it a bad game? Maybe a better way of looking at it is, it's misunderstood. Why would misunderstood be a better way of describing this game? It's one of the most well-known games on the NES. Many fond memories exist because of it. Maybe those memories revolve around the visuals, or others it's the sound effects. The music is nostalgic, maybe that's a bright spot for people. I swear, most NES owners had this game. So how could something so well known be misunderstood? Well, thinking back to when it was released in 1989, 2D side-scrolling platformers were incredibly popular. With the release of Super Mario Bros. A few years earlier, this was the style of game many people liked to play. Easy, run to the right, jump on enemies, simple gameplay. And yes, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles has areas that are like this, but it's much more than just a simple platformer. It has tons of varied gameplay styles. Besides the side-scrolling sections, there are also overhead areas, water levels, and vehicle sections. This is not a typical NES game. It's maybe more in the same vein as Zelda 2: The Adventure of Link. Not exactly like it, but some elements are similar. And maybe a little bit of Castlevania, with the way the characters move. It's not linear like many of the popular games of this era. The way you approach it has to be different. If you go into it like a Mario title, you won't get very far. Think of it more of an endurance game where you need to take your time. Patience might be a better way of saying it. You can switch between all 4 turtles at any time. Each of them has a separate life bar, but you have to manage them carefully or you'll lose that turtle for good. There are no extra lives. You can find and regain them in specific spots, though they are few and far between. You need to keep a close eye on each turtle's life bar. They also have different attack capabilities, having a longer or shorter range with their weapons. Donatello has the longest, while Raphael has the shortest. With the Donatello having the longest range, he is the best character in the game. Keeping him alive is a must. You don't want to lose him. There are also sub-weapons that you can pick up to make things a little easier. Patience is required to play every section of this game. You start out as Leonardo in an overhead section. It seems innocent enough, but if you get run over by the steamroller, you lose Leonardo. On the very first screen. I think the developers were sending a message with this. You need to be very careful and deliberate with every move you make. After successfully moving out of the steamroller's way, you need to find the correct sewer to enter. When you drop down into it, the game turns into a platformer. One of the more frustrating parts of this game are the enemies. Not only are some of their attacks infuriating, but they immediately respawn if you leave and come back to the parts of the screen they originally showed up on. So if I get rid of them here, I walk back, then forward again, look who's here. This gets old quick. But this is where patience is required. Again, this isn't your typical side-scroller game. This is a slow and steady push to the end, and this first platforming section is no different. Once you make your way to the end of the area, you have to fight Bebop, one of the most iconic characters from the Ninja Turtle series. This game makes you fight a boss at the end of the first section. After you defeat him, Rocksteady takes April and you follow him back to the surface, into an overhead view again. This cycle of overhead areas to side-scrolling platforming sections is what this game revolves around. You carefully make your way through more sewers and buildings until you square off with Rocksteady. And he's a pushover. Look at this idiot. After you beat Rocksteady, this game starts laying on the pressure. The 2 most infamous parts of this game happen pretty close to each other. The water stage and the you can just walk over it gap. Water levels usually aren't liked by many people. Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles not only drops you into a water level, but they also put the pressure on with a 2-minute and 20-second time limit. The goal isn't just to get to the end of the stage, but you also have to defuse 8 bombs while dodging electric bolts, rotating hazards, and electric plants. It's not easy, and really tests your ability to stay calm and efficient. Pick Raph and keep Mikey as a backup when your health bar gets depleted. The legendary "you can just walk over it" gap is right before an essential item you need to get to progress. This was so frustrating as a kid. James Rolfe got it exactly right with his video. They make it seem like you need to jump over it. It is a hole in the floor after all. There's a spot earlier in the game that you need to jump over to get to the other side, so the logic only makes sense that you should jump over this one too. This is just about the only similarity this game has with Super Mario Bros., because this small gap doesn't require a jump to cross it. You just walk over it. Exactly how you get over these small gaps in the first Mario game without jumping. Don't fall though, which you will if you didn't already know the trick, because you'll have to fight all the enemies again on your way back up. On a side note, I've always thought that Shredder's hand coming out of the TV in the cutscene was funny. It's not a mistake either, it's in the original development drawings. Along with the increasing difficulty, this game has a few items that are necessary to progress. If you pay attention to April in the bottom left corner, she lets you know what items you need to pick up. You need to get the missiles, which are used to break the barricades that are blocking the way for the party wagon, and the other is the rope that you need to use to get over a few specific gaps. There's another sub-weapon that is unlike any other. It's an absolute monster against enemies. The icon looks like a tube, but it is indeed a scroll. This is the most useful sub-weapon in the game. It's highly suggested that you max out every turtle with it. It's not necessary to do this, but if you want a little peace of mind, it doesn't hurt. This means you need to do a little farming. There's a room in this building that has it about halfway through, but it doesn't respawn if you just leave the room and come back. You need to get it, then leave the building, come all the way back up to that room, and finally get more. Falling in the water is an easy way to get out of the building, and it doesn't take away any of the life bar. Luckily, you get it in increments of 20. It takes some time, but it's worth the work. These will be a lifesaver in the later stages. After all that, you'll work your way through all the barricades to the next area. This is tricky because there are paths that don't lead you in the right direction. You don't want to run out of missiles. Continue your way until you find the next boss battle against Mecha Turtle, who has Splinter tied up. This fight is no joke. This is one of the places where you want to use your scrolls. It makes the fight way more manageable. So far, the game has required us to move very carefully. This is still true, but now we need to take things slowly and be deliberate with how we move our characters. Slow and deliberate is what the rest of the game will be about. Assess the rooms you're in and plan all your jumps. Another way of saying this would be take your time. Don't rush into it. Make your way through the various sewers, which take a while to figure out, until you get to the final room where the spiked walls close in on the character. Make sure you go to the left. You don't want to go to the right because there are shurikens there. If you get them, you'll lose all your scrolls for that character. After you get through the spiked wall areas, you'll fight a giant Mauser. This thing looks scary, but it's nothing really. It's probably the easiest boss in the game. At least with Rocksteady you had to time your attacks. After you beat the giant Mauser, the turtles get on the blimp and head over to the next stages. You'll notice that it's nighttime, the music has changed to something you haven't heard yet, and the enemies are all new. This is the start of the most intense and difficult parts of the game. Remember slow and deliberate? Well, that's still something that needs to be followed. Maybe even more now than ever. You're in search of the Technodrome, and it's randomly placed somewhere in one of these underground areas. Make your way through them, and with a little luck, you'll come across it. This Technodrome fight is no joke. Many frustrating deaths have happened here. Use the scrolls and take out everything until the eye remains. Time your jumps and take it out. Once inside, this is the final stretch of the game. With that, the game also ramps up the difficulty. There are more new enemies, and if you end up with the enemies with the jetpack, be extremely careful. These guys will deplete your life bar in seconds. This hallway is probably the most difficult area in the entire game. Take it slow and use your scrolls. If you make it past the hallway and the next screen with a sub-boss, you'll face off with Shredder. This guy shows up in a bolt of lightning. It's probably the best entrance of any boss in video game history. He puts up a tough fight. One hit from him takes away about half the turtle's life bar. But if you held onto some scrolls, you can get through him without too much trouble. When you finally defeat him, he explodes and you get the final cutscene. There are probably several ways to approach this game. Being patient, taking it slowly, and being deliberate with your character's moves are essential to making it to the end. Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles is a game that stood the test of time. It's remembered by many, even though it's a difficult game. You can't be carelessly jumping around these levels without meaningful consequences. This game requires your full attention. You have to be on your guard and become familiar with how the characters react to your inputs. One mistimed jump can spell disaster, and those jumps aren't easy to land. With this being a game based on a beloved children's cartoon, it seems like it would be an easy walk to the end, but that couldn't be further from the truth. Even as adults, this game still poses a challenge. Luckily, there are ways to play today that make it a little more forgiving. The Cowabunga collection has save states, which can really help with the more difficult spots. There's also the ever easily abused rewind feature. Being able to correct your mistakes and not having to live with the consequences of them is game-changing. Maybe that's not really playing the game, maybe it is. You be the judge. At least it's getting more people to play it that otherwise wouldn't have. There's no denying it's difficult, and that difficulty doesn't make it a bad game. It takes work to get through it, and maybe that's why it's misunderstood.